In Magic the Gathering, red often gets effects that do damage. It's the main form of removal that the color receives, and it often comes with the upside of also being able to target the opponent or planeswalkers. Typically, these cards can only go after one target, but there's a subset of these damaging effects that allow you to divide the damage that they do. This is significant upside because it can turn a spot removal spell into a spell that can kill multiple creatures, or it can allow you to do damage to a creature, a player, and a planeswalker all at once. In this video, we're taking a look at the 10 cards that do dividable damage that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. We're going to see that spells that do dividable damage have an amazing track record, as this is one of the most stacked lists I've done in a while. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Use the links in the description to visit their store. Here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. At number 10, it's Fireball, which is perhaps the most iconic spell that does dividable damage. This is because it's from Magic's very first set, limited edition alpha, and it's been reprinted tons over the years. For an X and a red, it does X damage divided evenly, rounded down among any number of targets, and you pay 1 generic mana extra for each target beyond the first. This means that you can just have Fireball go after one thing by paying X and a red, but it also has the upside of being able to decimate an entire board if you've got the extra mana around. Fireball was incredibly good in the early days of competitive Magic the Gathering. This was partly because of how it combined with Channel. If you had Channel and some other fast mana, which was plentiful in the form of the Moxen and Black Lotus, you could cast Channel and pay 19 life for 19 colorless mana, and use the rest of your mana to pay for the 20th damage and the red in Fireball's casting cost. This meant you could do 20 to your opponent on turn 1. This strategy was incredibly common among competitive players in 1993, and it was ridiculously consistent because at the time, there was no restriction at all on how many copies of a card a deck could have, and the minimum deck size was also only 40 cards. With no restriction in place, this resulted in games where whichever player went first would just win. That doesn't make for a very fun game. So, in 1994, when Wizards of the Coast decided to begin Sanctioned Magic, they introduced the 4 copies per card limit we know today, as well as the 60 card minimum. This was a direct result of the Channel Fireball combo, as well as some other instant win combos that were commonplace when deck building rules were so loose. And they didn't stop there, they also restricted the Channel to 1 copy per deck, so that this combo would be much more difficult to pull off. They also restricted the Power 9 mana rocks, of course, so having the mana plus Channel plus Fireball in your opening hand was a lot harder, although it did still happen sometimes. During the earliest days of competitive Magic, between the years of 1994 and 1997, Fireball was still a staple. 3 of the top 4 decks at the first World Championship were running it, as were 3 of the top 4 decks at the second World Championship, and 3 of the top 8 decks at the very first Pro Tour in 1996. In 1994 and 1995, you could still get lucky and have the combo in your opening hand, but Channel got fully banned at the end of 1995, but Fireball still saw play in Standard and Extended. This was because whether you could pull off the combo or not, it was a really good card. That's part of what made the combo so nasty. Fireball wasn't a useless card if you couldn't combo off. It was good even when you couldn't get the nut draw. After all, it could be used to finish the opponent off, kill one big creature, or wipe out some small ones, and there wasn't really a removal spell in the game with that same level of flexibility. After it got a reprint in Mirrodin, it started seeing play again, including in Block and Standard. It was even the win condition of choice for the game's earliest Clark Clan Ironworks decks, which could produce enough mana to make Fireball lethal in the early game, kind of like a more complicated version of the Channel Fireball combo. It's also seen some sporadic play in Pauper, a format where only commons are legal, where it's played in Tron decks, another deck capable of producing tons of mana. However, Fireball doesn't have any top 8s in any non-Pauper format since 2004, and it doesn't have any top 8s anywhere since 2020. So there's a good chance its time on this list is done, which is a little sad, since it's the card that helped set the stage for everything else on it. At number 9, it's Magma Opus. For 6 generic, a blue, and a red, it's an instant that does 4 damage divided among any number of targets. It also taps 2 target permanents, makes a 4/4 elemental token, and draws you 2 cards. You can also pay 2 red-blue hybrid mana and discard it to make a treasure. So yeah, this does a whole lot beyond the dividable damage, and casting this results in absolutely absurd value, as well it should, because of its massive mana cost. Despite the immense mana required to do it, it was pretty easy to cast in Standard, first thanks to the presence of a whole bunch of treasure and other ramp on powerful cards like Goldspan Dragon. Later, after the release of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, it was often combined with Hinata Dawn Crowned. Hinata reduces the cost of your spells by 1 for each target they have, and Magma Opus has a whole bunch of targets, so you can cast it for a huge discount. The fact that the damage was dividable could allow you to target 4 things with that mode alone, so it was pretty easy to cast it for only a single blue and a single red. In addition to being played in Standard, the Opus also had significant success alongside Hinata in Historic and Alchemy. It's also used in Pioneer, where the fact that it puts itself into the graveyard and gives you a treasure is abused by cards that let you cast it from the graveyard for free, like Torrential Gearhulk. Magma Opus is going to continue to put up top 8s in Pioneer in the future, and could move up the list. At number 8, it's Pyrokinesis. For 4 generic and 2 red, it's an instant that does 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of creatures, and you can also exile a red card from your hand rather than pay its mana cost. That's right, this is a free dividable damage spell, and as an instant, you have to be worried about it showing up at any time. It's only restricted to creatures, but this is still a very powerful take on this type of spell. Fun fact, it's the much less well-known Cyclemate of Force of Will, another spell you can cast for free. Anyway, it saw some play in Standard Control decks and Extended Mono Red aggro decks, but it's been played the most in the Eternal formats. It's been showing up regularly in Legacy ever since the format started to receive major tournaments back in 2005. Goblin and Dragon Stompy decks have been the most common home for Pyrokinesis over the years. It's also been played in Vintage Goblins, but its most common home in the format has been manaless decks like Bazaar Aggro. These decks like to go off just by discarding or milling a whole bunch of cards and playing a bunch of free creatures, but sometimes they need removal, and Pyrokinesis being a free dividable spell means you can use it to wipe away your opponent's fast start without any mana at all. Pyrokinesis is going to continue to put up top 8s, as it has steadily been doing for over 2 decades, so it has a chance at moving higher on this list in the future. At number 7, it's Forked Bolt. For 1 red mana, it does 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. So it does less damage than everything we've seen so far, but it also only costs 1 mana and 1 card. But this is still shockingly modal. You can do 2 to your opponent, 1 to 2 X1s, kill an X2, or kill an X1 and do 1 to your opponent. That's a lot of possibilities on a super cheap card. While it saw moderate play in Standard, it's been more successful in Modern and Legacy. In both formats, it's been played alongside cheap creatures who love cheap spells like Delver of Secrets, Monastery Swiftspear, and Dragon's Rage Channeler. It's still actively seeing play in Modern right now, so it's another card that can move up the list in the future, especially because a few of the cards ahead of it are inactive. At number 6, it's Arc Lightning. It's 2 generic and a red for a sorcery that does 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. It might cost 3 times what Lightning Bolt does for the same amount of damage, but unlike the Bolt, this can potentially generate a 3-for-1 against an opponent with 3 X1s in play, and a 2-for-1 is on the table too. Arc Lightning was originally printed in Urza's Saga, and it was heavily played in both Block and Standard. Some of the most heavily played creatures in those formats, like Jackal Pup, Goblin Welder, and Llanowar Elves, were especially vulnerable to Arc Lightning. It also saw a bit of play in Extended, but largely went idle after rotating out of Standard in 2002. That is until a reprint in Khans of Tarkir brought it back into the format more than 10 years later. Once again, it was a fairly heavily played card in Standard. This time around, it was more commonly played in aggro decks like Mono Red and Gruul Aggro. Most recently, it's been played in Pauper Rakdos control decks, but it doesn't have any top 8 since 2019, so cards like Forked Bolt and Pyrokinesis will probably pass it in the long run. At number 5, it's Electrolyze. It's actually tied with Arc Lightning with 82 points, but it has more first-tier top 8s than Arc Lightning does, so it got the higher spot on the list. For 1 generic, a blue, and a red, it's an instant that does 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets, and you draw a card. Electrolyze may be less efficient at doing damage, but anytime you tack draw a card onto a card that has a nice effect already, you end up with something powerful, since it straight up replaces itself. So you can still get something like a 3-for-1, and it's even easier to get a 2-for-1 with than most other dividable damage effects. Also, if you just decide to do both damage to your opponent, you're still getting okay value because it replaces itself. Over the years, it's been successful in multiple formats, and it is particularly popular in control decks. It's been played the most by far in Modern, where it's been played in just about every blue-red control deck the format has ever seen, including Splinter Twin, Delver, Blue Moon, and Jeskai Control. It also got reprinted in Strixhaven's Mystical Archive, which gave it legality in Historic, where it's also gained a few points. However, Electrolyze has been inactive since 2021. Both Forked Bolt and a cheaper Dividable burn spell further up on this list have largely replaced it, with creatures like Ragavan and Dragon's Rage Channeler the main reason. These are creatures you have to be able to kill early, and even if you get to draw a card with Electrolyze and kill them, if you've already been hit by Ragavan or Dragon's Rage Channeler, you're not going to feel very good about that. So Electrolyze is probably done putting up top 8s. At number 4, it's Inferno Titan. For 4 generic and 2 red, it's a 6/6, and you can pay 1 red mana to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. While being a 6 mana 6/6 with upside is cool, what makes this card truly powerful is the fact that it has an enters or attacks trigger. These are somewhat commonplace today, but Inferno Titan and the rest of the cards in the Titan cycle were the first creatures to ever have them. In this case, the Titan does 3 damage divided among any number of targets every time it enters or attacks. Enters or attacks triggers are powerful since they make sure you get value up front, which helps offset the problem of your creature getting removed, and if they don't, well, they just keep on generating crazy value every turn, since Inferno Titan's sheer size, plus the fact that it can remove creatures with the Dividable Lightning Bolt, means that it's likely to be able to keep on attacking over and over again. Inferno Titan might be way more expensive than the other Dividable damage effects on the list, but adding a huge body to the board while also potentially wiping everything away is super sweet. Inferno Titan saw a lot of play in Standard, and it was legal there for a while as a result of being reprinted in 2 consecutive core sets, Magic 2011 and Magic 2012. It saw play in virtually any red deck that wasn't an aggro deck, so it was used in decks like Ramp and Control. While it also saw a bit of play in Extended, it's done far more in the format that replaced it, Modern. There it's been featured in ramp decks like Scapeshift and Amulet Titan. While it isn't the eponymous Titan of Amulet Titan decks, that would be Primeval Titan, it is still a very good creature to ramp into, and the deck can even give it haste with Handwire Battlements, and getting the enters and attacks trigger in the same turn is backbreaking. It's also found success in modern Ponza decks, which are simultaneously ramp and land destruction decks, and one of the best ways to leverage that mana advantage is to slam the Titan on the battlefield early and wipe away anything your opponent has managed to cast with the mana they do have. For a time, it was also cheated into play in Legacy Sneak Attack decks, which could use that powerful enchantment to put the Titan into play with haste for a turn, once again getting its powerful triggers twice in the same turn. Inferno Titan also used to be one of the main win conditions in vintage Oath of Druids decks, to the point that between 2016 and 2019, the main variant of the deck was simply called Inferno Oath. The Titan was a great creature to put into play on turn 2, since it typically wiped the opponent's board while also pressuring your opponent in a big way. Oath of Druids can also only trigger when an opponent has more creatures in play than you, and the deck would use Forbidden Orchard to make that happen. The Titan could wipe away the free token you gave your opponent and kill them super quickly, usually in just 2 swings between its body, fire breathing, and its trigger. Unfortunately, the power level of non-rotating formats has passed the Titan by, as it doesn't have any significant top 8 since 2022. There are just way better creatures to cheat into play these days if you're looking for one that lets you interact with your opponent, like Archon of Cruelty, which has flying and has an enters or attacks trigger of its own that is generally way more powerful since it drains 3 life, makes the opponent give up a card in hand, or something on the battlefield, and draws you a card. So, as great as Inferno Titan has been for a very long time, it's no longer the most relevant card in competitive Magic. At number 3, it's Fire and Ice. It's a split card, which means you can choose to cast either side of it. The Fire side is what gets it on this list. It's an instant that costs 1 generic and a red to do 2 damage, divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets, but it's basically a dividable damage spell with an additional modal upside, because it can also be cast as Ice, which costs 1 generic and a blue to tap a permanent and you draw a card. I always think Fire and Ice is a great card for expressing just how powerful modality is, since neither side of this card is individually very impressive. They're both fine cards, but not something that would see a ton of play individually. But having the option to do one or the other on a single card really matters. Fire and Ice has seen play in every single one of Magic's formats as a result of how powerful it is. One of the sweetest decks it was used in was Extended Isochron Scepter. With the rules at the time, the mana value of a card was based on the value of an individual spell on it, so Fire and Ice had a mana value of 2 and could be put on the Scepter. The really sweet thing was every time you used a scepter with an imprinted fire and ice, you got to choose which side you wanted again, and you didn't lose any of the modality. Unfortunately, that rule has since been changed, and now Fire and Ice has a mana value of 4 and can't be put on the scepter. That's okay though, because Fire and Ice is pretty heavily played in control decks in every format it's legal in. For a long time, it wasn't legal in Modern, so it didn't have points there, but it got a reprint in Modern Horizons 2 in 2021. And it is now seeing a ton of play in that format where it's been the most successful in crashing Footfalls decks. These decks look to cast a 3-mana spell with Cascade, and they are constructed in such a way that you always cast Footfalls off of Cascade. This is accomplished by not playing any other cards with a mana value of less than 3. But not doing anything the first few turns of the game is usually a pretty bad idea, and that's where Fire and Ice comes in. Fire and Ice is seen as a 4-mana card by Cascade, but you're able to cast either side of it for 2 mana in the earlier part of the game before you cast your 3-mana Cascade spell and hit your Footfalls. In addition to a Modern legal reprint, it was also recently reprinted at Common, making it legal in Pauper for the first time too. In short, Fire and Ice is super active right now in multiple formats and is likely to continue to amass top 8s. However, the 2 cards in front of it are also incredibly active, like our number 2 card, which is Shatterskull Smashing. For X and 2 red mana, it's a sorcery that does X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers, and if X is 6 or more, it does twice X damage divided as you choose instead. So, as a sorcery, it's not the most impressive thing ever, especially if you're paying less than 6 for X, which is what you usually do, in which case it doesn't feel all that efficient even if you can divide the damage between a couple of things. However, this is a modal double-faced card, and on the other side it's Shatterskull the Hammer Pass, a land that can tap for red and enters tapped unless you pay 3 life. With modal double-faced cards, you can choose to play either side. So on one side it's a land, one that can even enter untapped, and if you need mana you'll be happy about that, but if you draw this late, you've got a powerful spell. Basically, modal double-faced lands are good when you're getting flooded out or your mana screwed, and that's just not the case for very many cards in Magic. It saw significant play in Standard, showing up in virtually any red deck, including the aforementioned Jeskai Hanada decks. In Pioneer, it tends to see play in aggressive red decks, as they like to play as few lands as possible and keep drawing gas, and this gives them a land that does something half the time. This has also been played in decks that take advantage of the rules about this type of land. Because the front face of this card isn't a land, that means that cards that check for lands while revealing cards in your library, like Goblin Charbelcher or Balustrade Spy, don't see them as lands. This means that if your deck's lands are all modal double-faced lands like this one, the Belcher will always do lethal when you activate it, and the Spy will always mill your entire library, enabling a combo that will win you the game. The Balustrade Spy combo got both it and the similar Undercity Informer banned in Pioneer, but the combo is still intact in other formats like Modern and Legacy, and it sees play in plenty of other decks in both of those formats too. One other major benefit of playing Smashing is that it's a land when that's what you need, but it can also be pitched to cards that ask specifically for red cards, like Fury, something most lands can't do. Shatterskull Smashing is going to continue to put up top 8s going forward, and I think in the long run it has a chance at surpassing the number 1 card on this list, which is actually a card that I just mentioned, and that card is, of course, Fury. For 3 generic and 2 red, it's a 3/3 with double strike, and when it enters it deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures or planeswalkers. That's already a pretty sweet card. Removes some stuff and adds a big double strike body to the board after all. But it's the last part of this card that really pushes it into absurd territory. Like the other elemental incarnations from Modern Horizons 2, it has an evoke cost that doesn't cost any mana. In this case, you exile a red card from your hand, like Shatterskull Smashing. Evoke is an alternate casting cost, but if you cast it that way, you sacrifice it right away. In other words, you only get the enters trigger, at least in theory. Even if that is what happens, you're usually going to be pretty happy to cast a removal spell for free, and because the damage is dividable, you can even end up breaking even on cards instead of 2-for-1ing yourself. It's a Modern Horizons card, so it isn't legal everywhere, but where it has been legal, it's been an absolute beating. Nowhere has this been more true than in Modern, where it was played alongside fellow elemental incarnation Grief in Rakdos Scam. This deck gets its name because of the fact that its defining elements feel like they just aren't fair. The game plan in the deck is to evoke one of the incarnations and then cast a recursive instant, like Not Dead After All. This brings the sacrificed elemental incarnation back and you get the enters trigger all over again. In other words, with Fury you spend 0 mana for a 4/4 with double strike that does 8 dividable damage to your opponent's board. Sounds like a scam, right? Ultimately, Wizards of the Coast agreed, and Fury got banned out of the format because of how nasty this was. That means these days, Fury is only legal in Legacy and Vintage when it comes to 60-card formats, but it probably doesn't surprise you that it sees plenty of play in those formats too. In Legacy, it's very heavily played, showing up in a wide variety of decks, including aggro decks like Goblins, combo decks like Painter, tempo decks like Cascade Crash, and prison decks like Dragon Stompy. Almost everyone who's playing Red in the format has at least a couple of Furies somewhere in their 75. It sees play in Vintage too, though it's more limited there to decks that run very little mana, like the aforementioned Bizarre aggro decks, where Pyrokinesis is sometimes also played. It's actually kind of funny to compare this to Pyrokinesis because it's cheaper, does the same amount of dividable damage, and can also be a creature, and can still be cast for free. The one thing it doesn't have on Pyrokinesis, and the reason that sometimes Kinesis still sees play over it, is because Pyrokinesis can do its thing at instant speed. Anyway, despite being banned in Modern, Fury is still racking up tons of points, especially in Legacy, but Shatterskull Smashing is legal in more formats, so I think it may be the #1 card on this list in the future. So those are the top 10 cards that do dividable damage. If you like being able to decide where damage goes, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on the over 850 other MTG top 10s, including more that look at specific mechanics or burn spells, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.